Welcome back, dear dreamers, to the Sleepy Science History Hour. I hope you're tucked in, your pillow soft beneath you, and the day's noise already fading into the distance. Tonight, we drift far so far, into a world that no human eyes have seen, a world where 40-foot dragons walked the land and winged giants traced lazy arcs across prehistoric skies. This is the Age of Giant Reptiles, a place of warm winds, deep forests, and creatures so vast they seemed part of the horizon itself. Close your eyes, breathe slow, and let the story carry you. Because tonight, the past is wide awake. What is the sound of a world getting ready to remember itself? It begins not with a roar, but with a hush, an inhale drawn across oceans, sands, and stone. The earth in its deep time sits like a quiet library before opening hours, shelves stacked with the stories of creatures so large the air around them seemed to bend. Somewhere in that stillness, a question floats. If the past is a sleeping dragon, then what happens in the moment just before it wakes? He stands, the narrator who isn't quite a person, more like a lantern carried by gentlest hands, at the shoreline of a vanished sea. The light is muted, the sky a soft watercolor of dawns long gone. He speaks in a voice you may recognize, slow and steady, the way a river teaches a pebble to be smooth. Listen, he says, because listening is the first way of traveling. And you do. You listen for the whisper of ancient wings, for the rumble of feet that pressed the ground into memory. You let your mind step lightly onto the path where the past and the possible overlap. Here, the Age of Giant Reptiles is not a parade of teeth and terror. It is a garden wide and warm. Imagine the earth as a dragon's chest, rising and falling with continental breaths. Once, these continents were neighbors at a long table. Later, they drifted apart like sleepy friends, still fond, just farther away. The climate hummed on a lower note, a steady chord. Forests unfurled with the patience of painters. Rivers braided themselves across wide plains. If you close your eyes, you can hear the brushstrokes. Leaf against leaf, foot against fern, water carrying the daily rumors of the sky. Dinosaurs, the thunder lizards, as storytellers once called them, did not arrive as interrupting guests. They grew into the room as natural as lichen on stone. Their size was not a boast but a solution, the body's way of fitting into an environment's invitation. A 40-foot predator was not absurd in such a world. It was a sentence written in a generous font. And overhead, far above the tree ferns and the cycads, there were gliders of the wind, pterosaurs, whose wings wrote cursive across marine breezes. The largest of them, later given names that taste like mountains, spanned the width of small aircraft. They were not monsters. They were residents. He pads along the strand, letting his words collect like shells. To understand the dragons, he suggests, begin with the air. Air is the planet's lullaby, carries the weather and the smells, the pollen and the promise. In some ages it was thicker and kinder to wings, in others leaner, tuning the music differently. But always it moved, and anything that sailed or ran or perched learned to move with it. Picture a pterosaur stepping into a gust the way a dancer leans into a partner. Trusting, attuned. Now picture a long-necked grazer lifting its head above a grove the way a periscope rises through calm water. These are the gestures of a world that understood the choreography of breath. A chapter about beginnings should honor smallness, too. Beneath the heavy footfalls of giants, there were quiet stories. Insects with jeweled wings, little mammals with nights full of secrets, fish that flickered in reefs bright as embroidery. The large make the world visible, but the small keep it alive. He pauses, as if he has knelt to look more closely. You, he says softly, addressing the patient listener, are made of both, the loud chapters that shake the ground and the quiet footnotes that steady the page. And so were the dragons. They hunted and nested, fought and flirted, not as emblems but as animals. Their days had weather, their nights had stars. We are used to imagining them as isolated dioramas in museums, all bones and dramatic lighting. But the living creatures were warm with blood and intent. They wore their colors like flags or whispers, Some camouflaged themselves in the green glamour of forest light. Some flashed crests or horns the way poets lift metaphors when the heart gets too full. A tyrant with a skull like a cathedral lowered its face to scent the air. Curious, alert, much as a deer does in the woods today. The distance between then and now becomes thin, like rice paper, if you tilt the page just so. He wanders inland, into the green chambers of prehistoric forests. The trunks are pillars holding up a canopy teeming with conversations. You can almost hear the sap climbing, the leaves rehearsing rain. Trees are very slow dragons, he murmurs, creatures that devour sunlight without leaving teeth marks. Under their shade, herds moved the way rivers do. Steady, purposeful, forever returning. There were mothers who guarded nests with the patience of tide pools, and juveniles who learned by watching, like apprentices studying the slow art of survival. Even the predators carried tenderness like a hidden pocket. They cleaned their young, shared warmth, raised their heads at distant thunder not out of fear but habit. If the world sometimes flared into violence, it was rarely senseless. A sprint across a plain was a sentence in a language that included hunger and hope. A chase was also a test of design. The long muscles in the legs, the balance of a tail like a tightrope walker's pole, the placement of eyes where seeing the future just a step ahead meant the difference between life and not life. When the chase ended, the world resumed its breath. That is how most moments went. Not crashing symphonies, but quiet measures played with the patience of wind over water. To call them dragons is to admit that awe is a proper scientific instrument. Not the only one, perhaps, but a good one to begin with. Opens the door. It says, I am small and that is fine. Show me something larger than my worry. The old reptiles answer by being exactly what they were. When a pterosaur launched from a cliff, it trusted the invisible architecture of air, the way you trust the floor in the dark. When a giant plant-eater moved through a swamp, its bulk was not a problem. It was a conversation with buoyancy and mud. Complexity is rarely loud. It is mostly polite. He points to the ground as if footprints are still drying there. Every step is a note, he says, and across the ages a melody forms. The melody is migration and season, courtship and territory, danger and relief. You can hum it if you want. It sounds like your own heart when you lie in bed and let the day drain out slowly. The creatures of the Mesozoic did not know they were remarkable. They knew, instead, the precise location of waterholes, the feel of shade at noon, the way certain winds meant certain insects meant certain birds. Knowing is often local. Wonder makes it large. Night falls gently in this remembered world. The chorus changes. Insects stitch the edges of darkness together. Somewhere a predator lifts its head and does not move, because stillness is also a kind of strength. Somewhere else, a clutch of eggs holds heat like a promise cupped in two hands. Stars hum their ancient hymn above it all, unconcerned with names. A comet passes in polite silence. The moon climbs, slow and silver, painting the scales and feathers alike with the same indifferent brush. And you, visitor across time, find that your breathing has matched the rhythm of this place almost without trying. What is the sound of a world remembering itself? It is this: the spill of waves on an old shore, the murmur of leaves around a nest, the hush before wings. It is not dramatics. It is continuity, a soft thread running through eras, tying the lives of dragons to your own small astonishments. The way a bird regards you from a fence, or how a breeze lifts your hair and you think of flight. He turns, as if to lead you onward, and the light shifts. A path opens between trees, inviting as a bookmark. You understand that this first step has been only an introduction, a bow at the door. Before we go, he offers one more small truth, the kind that warms like tea. Everything you meet in these pages, he says, was beloved by its time. The earth is good at loving in many directions, the tiny and the towering, the fleet and the ponderous. The dragons were not exceptions. They were participants. This age of thunder and wing was, at heart, an age of balance. Heat traded for shade, risk for resource, hunger for satisfaction, and always, breath for breath. And so the chapter closes the way it began, with a question that is also an invitation. When you listen closely, what do you hear beneath the thunder? The answer is not a single note but a field of them, rippling outward. In the distance, a silhouette unfolds into motion. A shadow steps into moonlight. Somewhere above the treeline, a vast pair of wings tests the evening air, and the world holds still to watch. The dragon takes a breath and the story, our story, leans in to begin. What is the shape of freedom? Perhaps it is not a straight line, nor a single motion, but a tapestry woven in air. You might think of it as a ribbon loosened from the earth, curling and drifting, never quite still. Or perhaps it is something older, the memory of a fish that once swam in seas, transformed into a creature that now swims in clouds. The question lingers like mist at dawn. How does the sky remember those who once called it home? He stands at the edge of a cliff that no longer exists in the present day. But in this remembering, it is real. Below him stretches a shoreline of deep blues and glassy greens, where ancient waves fold over themselves with patient precision. The breeze is not just air. It is history moving, wrapping around him, inviting you to lean closer. Look there, he says softly. You follow his gaze upward, into a pale sky alive with slow-moving silhouettes. Wings. Vast, deliberate wings. These are not the wings of birds, you know. They are different, thinner, stretched like fine silk over the architecture of long, jointed bones. The pterosaurs own this air, but they do not hurry. They have learned that the sky is generous if approached with trust. They tilt into invisible currents, letting the wind carry them like a whispered promise. Their shadows wander over the ocean's surface, sometimes so clear they look like the ghosts of giant fish swimming in a second sea above the real one. To understand them, he suggests you must first understand the invisible. Air is rarely seen, yet it is as tangible to a pterosaur as the ground is to you. Imagine leaning against nothing, yet feeling its strength push back. Imagine resting your life on something you cannot hold, but which holds you in return. The pterosaurs were masters of this invisible embrace. Some spanned 40 feet or more, their wing beats slow and considered, each stroke a note in the quiet symphony of their flight. They were not all the same. Some were no larger than a raven, quick and agile, darting between cliffs in pursuit of insects. Others, like the Quetzalcoatlus, could stand taller than a person even on the ground, their wings capable of catching the sigh of a distant storm. Their beaks were not just tools but stories, some long and spear-like, perfect for fishing, others short and strong, meant for crushing the shells of ancient crustaceans. And yet, despite their varied shapes and diets, they shared one truth. The air was their language. He steps away from the cliff's edge, leading you to a grassy rise where the land gives a better view of the horizon. Here, the sky is a stage, and the pterosaurs move like dancers who have rehearsed for millions of years. When they bank to one side, it is not with urgency but with a gentle curiosity, as though they are reading a sentence written in wind. The updrafts lift them higher, then release them into slow spirals toward the sea. From this distance, they seem weightless. But freedom is not without its labors. The largest among them had to launch themselves carefully, using powerful limbs to vault into the air, like pole vaulters without poles. The takeoff was a moment of vulnerability, but also of faith. Faith that the invisible road would rise to meet them. Once aloft, they could cross distances that would take other creatures days. They were not merely traveling. They were weaving the continents together with the thread of their passage. If you listen long enough, you can almost hear it, the sigh of their wings against the air. It is not a harsh sound, but a low, continuous murmur, like the tide beneath a pier. He tells you that, in their time, the world's climate was warmer, the poles green and alive with vegetation. Oceans were wider, coastlines more generous. There were more places for the sky to meet the sea, and more reasons for the pterosaurs to travel between them. They were both hunters and wanderers. Over open water, some skimmed the surface with their beaks, scooping fish in the way a hand might skim pebbles from a fountain. Others preferred the safety of inland lakes, their shadows startling smaller creatures along the shore. On land, they could walk with a curious gait, using both wings and legs the way a person might use both arms and feet when climbing. To see one folding its wings after landing was to watch the sea fold itself back into the shore. Graceful, inevitable. The narrator's voice drops lower, more intimate. And here is the part we often forget. He says, as though telling you a secret. The sky was not theirs alone. Above the forests and the plains, smaller flying creatures, early birds, insects, even drifting spores, shared the air. The pterosaurs were giants, yes, but giants in a crowded sky. They had to learn to move without greed, to circle without disturbing the smaller lives that darted below them. In that way, the sky itself was a kind of commons, a shared gift, not a possession. Time in this place seems to stretch. You watch them circle and glide, each turn tracing a soft geometry against the blue. The narrator does not rush you. He lets the scene sink into your breathing, as if the rhythm of their flight is gently instructing your own lungs. This is how they lived. In conversation with the wind, never demanding, only responding. It is a kind of wisdom, he suggests, to accept what the air offers instead of trying to force it into something it is not. The sun begins to lower, and the light thickens into gold. Over the ocean, the pterosaurs descend toward a sandbar where the water shallows into tidipools. They fold their wings with the care of someone putting away an instrument after a long song. Their long shadows mingle, indistinct, as if reminding you that in flight, they were many, and also one. What, then, is the shape of freedom? Perhaps it is not the wings themselves, but the trust in what lies beneath them. Perhaps it is knowing that every launch is a leap of faith, and that every landing is a promise kept. The pterosaurs are gone now, their bones scattered in stone, their wings folded in the earth's archives. But the air still remembers. It holds the patterns they carved, the same way a river remembers every pebble it has touched. He turns to you as the last light gathers on the horizon. When you feel the wind on your face, he says, you are feeling a library that includes their stories. The same air that carried them now carries the leaves outside your window, the dust motes in your room, the breath you exhale. The connection is not metaphor alone. It is real and it is ongoing. Night arrives quietly, wrapping the ocean and the cliff in a deepening blue. Above, stars begin to pierce the darkness, each one a silent witness to all the flights that have come and gone. The pterosaurs settle into their roosts, heads tucked, wings relaxed, the day's labor exchanged for the stillness of sleep. You imagine the warmth of their folded bodies, the slow rhythm of their breathing. The narrator's voice softens to a whisper, as if speaking to the dark itself. Freedom is not endless motion. Sometimes it is the peace that comes when the journey is done. And so the chapter closes, not with the rush of wings, but with the quiet certainty of a creature at rest, having trusted the sky and been rewarded. What does it mean to live as a moving piece of the horizon? Perhaps it is to carry the sky on your back, to lift your head into clouds as if tasting their edges. Or perhaps it is to stretch yourself across the day so slowly that the sun does not notice you are walking. The question drifts like pollen in warm air. How does the earth hold creatures so large, yet so gentle, that they seem carved from patience itself? He is waiting for you in the green heat of a Mesozoic morning. The light here is different, gold washed with green, filtered through fronds and towering cycads. The air smells of damp earth and flowering plants that have no modern names. Somewhere in the distance, the ground makes a sound like a low drumbeat, steady and unhurried. The narrator tilts his head toward the sound, and you follow, your steps soft so as not to disturb the rhythm. And then you see them. They rise from the forest like living columns, their necks arcing higher than the tallest trees. Sauropods, the long-necked giants of deep time. Their bodies are the color of weathered stone, patterned with subtle mottling that mirrors the shifting shade around them. Each step presses a shallow lake into the earth, filling slowly with water where rain will later rest. They move as a river moves, not in haste, but with the inevitability of something that has always been on its way. The narrator speaks in that same slow cadence, his words folding into the moment. These are the architects of open space, he says. When they move, They change the world, not with claws or teeth, but with the architecture of their bodies. They strip the high branches of leaves unreachable to any other creature. They open paths through forests where smaller animals follow. They carry seeds in their bellies, dropping them miles from where they were eaten, planting future groves without intention or ceremony. Their necks sway gently as they feed, like masts in a harbor, each one tracing its own slow arc through the air. To see them up close is to understand that size is not always aggression. These giants are herbivores, and their power lies in persistence. Day after day, they walk and graze and walk, knitting themselves into the landscape's daily routine. The forests have grown to expect them the way rivers expect rain. He guides you closer to one that has lowered its head to a level where you can truly see it. The eye is deep and calm, holding the reflection of a sky it has lived under for decades. This creature has known more summers than most predators survive. Its life is measured not in seasons of hunting but in seasons of growing muscle, bone, memory. A sauropod does not rush to adulthood. It climbs there slowly, each year adding rings of strength like the rings in a tree trunk. You might imagine such a large creature as unshakable, but the narrator reminds you that even giants listen to the world for signs. Every step, he says, is a conversation with the ground. Every breath is a measure of the air. A sudden shift in wind can mean fire. A rumble far away can mean rain, or the approach of predators. And so they live in awareness, not fear. Aware of the herds moving nearby, the calls of distant birds, the taste of new growth after a storm. In the heat of the afternoon, they gather near a broad, slow-moving river. Their feet sink slightly into the mud, and small fish dart away from the ripples they cause. Some drink deeply, drawing up the cool water in great pulls. Others wade in, letting the weight of their bodies press them into the soft bottom until the water laps halfway up their flanks. The narrator smiles faintly. Even the largest creatures need to be held sometimes. Above them, pterosaurs circle lazily, their shadows skating across the rippling surface. On the banks, smaller dinosaurs pick their way through the reeds, careful not to come too close. In this shared moment, predator and prey are both quiet. There is enough water for all, and the heat makes even hunger wait its turn. You watch a young sauropod trail behind the herd, smaller by far but already shaped by the same gentle geometry. It stretches its neck experimentally, reaching for leaves that sway just out of reach. In time, it will grow into the sky itself, but for now, it is content with what it can touch. The herd accepts its slower pace, adjusting their path so the youngster is never left behind. The narrator's voice softens, almost as if speaking to himself. The horizon shifts when they move, he says. And it's true, look closely, and you'll see how the far line between earth and sky bends slightly with their passing, as though the world itself makes room for them. Evening comes slowly, the light pooling in long shadows beneath their feet. The herd moves toward a stand of trees where the leaves are tender with recent growth. As they feed, the sound is like rain on a canvas roof, steady, rhythmic, soothing. In the distance, thunder murmurs, but the giants pay it no mind. Rain will come and they will welcome it. Water is the one weight they do not carry. He invites you to sit on a low rise and watch them until the light fades. As the first stars appear, the silhouettes of the sauropods are like mountain ridges in motion. You find yourself breathing in time with their slow steps, your heart settling into the long measure of their lives. It is hard to imagine them ever ending. And yet, the narrator reminds you gently, all stories fold into other stories. The giants will one day leave, and the earth will carry on. But for now, they are here, and the horizon still bends for them. What does it mean to live as a moving piece of the horizon? Perhaps it means to live without rushing, to understand that distance is not an enemy but a companion. Perhaps it means to trust that there will always be another grove ahead, another river to cool your feet, another sky to raise your head into. The sauropods teach you, without words, that vastness can be gentle, and that the slowest journeys sometimes leave the deepest tracks. The stars grow brighter. Somewhere, deep in the forest, a night insect begins its steady pulse, marking the time until morning. The herd settles, folding their legs beneath them, necks resting against their own massive bodies. The day's work of moving, eating, and shaping the world is done. In the hush that follows, you realize that you, too, feel heavier, but in a good way, like the earth after a soft rain. The narrator's voice is no more than a breath now. When you walk away from here, he says, remember that the horizon is not fixed. It moves with you. It bends for the gentle as it did for them. And in the last light, you watch the long necks fade into shadow, each one still carrying the sky on its back, each one still a piece of the horizon. What does it mean to wait for the world to come close? Some creatures announce themselves with thunder, others with songs or colors or the restless energy of movement. But there are those whose presence is known only in the pause, when the forest falls silent, when the wind seems to hesitate before moving on. These are the watchers. And in the Mesozoic, they wore teeth like small moons and eyes that caught the last light of day. The narrator stands in a forest whose air is thick with the perfume of ancient plants, resin and fern mingling in a slow, green breath. You follow him along a narrow game trail where the soil is pressed with tracks, some small, some as wide as your outstretched hand. The canopy filters the sun into shifting patterns, and somewhere in those patterns, you feel it, the weight of unseen eyes. Patience, the narrator murmurs, is a kind of hunting. The watchers here are the predators, theropods of many shapes and sizes. Not all are giants. Some stand only as tall as a man's waist, their bodies slender and built for weaving between trees. Others, of course, are immense. Tyrannosaurs, allosaurs, and other apex hunters whose names would not be given until long after their bones turned to stone. They are not mindless monsters, though. They are students of rhythm, listening for the heartbeat of the land. One of them is here now, though you cannot see it. The narrator pauses, tilts his head, and you hear it too. The faint shift of weight on leaves, a sound like cloth sliding over wood. Somewhere ahead, a predator waits. It is not rushing toward its meal. It is folding itself into the silence, the way ink seeps into paper. He tells you that these hunters lived in a world where survival meant knowing the language of stillness. In a forest, movement is loud. Stillness is invisible. The watchers understood that every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, is a letter in the sentence of pursuit. They learned to write those sentences carefully, placing each sound where it belonged. Through a gap in the foliage, you see it at last. A mid-sized predator, perhaps 20 feet from snout to tail. Its skin is dappled with shadow and light, so perfectly matched to its surroundings that your eyes keep losing it. The head is narrow, the jaw lined with teeth not yet bared. It is not in a frenzy. It is listening, learning the patterns of a small herd of plant-eaters just beyond the next grove. See how it waits? The narrator says. The strike is only a moment. The waiting is the work. You watch as the predator shifts one clawed foot forward, each step deliberate, placing weight where it will not betray its presence. Even in stillness, you can feel the coil of power in its limbs, a readiness that could unfurl in a heartbeat. But the heartbeat is not yet. Elsewhere in the forest, smaller predators work in pairs, weaving through undergrowth to flush out prey. They speak to each other in subtle signals. A tilt of the head, a change in pace, a faint exhale. Hunting is a language with many dialects, and each species has written its own. Not all waiting ends in violence. Sometimes the predator pauses because the opportunity is not right: wind direction, cover, distance. And sometimes the watchers themselves become the watched. The narrator reminds you that even a tyrannosaur, king of its realm, could be humbled by injury, hunger, or the relentless march of time. In the end, every hunter will be hunted, if not by another animal, then by the quiet patience of the earth. The day grows warmer, and the forest becomes a mosaic of shadowed hollows and bright, sunlit clearings. In one such clearing, you see the aftermath of a hunt. Scattered footprints, a few feathers caught in the grass, the faint scent of iron in the air. Life has been exchanged for life, as it has for millions of years. The predator is gone, belly heavy, leaving the scavengers to pick through what remains. The narrator kneels and brushes his hand over one of the prints. Each step, he says, is a story written in a language that will one day vanish. And yet, even when the words are gone, the meaning will remain. You think of the fossilized tracks you've seen in museums, how they look so fixed, so final. But here, in the living world, they are temporary as breath. Rain will come, plants will grow, the trail will fade, and the watcher will move on. By late afternoon, the forest is a place of long shadows. Somewhere far off, a deep call echoes. A sound felt more in your ribs than in your ears. The narrator tells you it is a territorial warning, not a challenge meant for you. The watchers speak not only to their prey but to each other, drawing invisible boundaries across the land. The calls rise and fall like the tolling of ancient bells, marking the hours in a language older than timekeeping. As evening comes, the predators change their pace. Some grow bolder in the dim light, stepping into open spaces where their shapes blur into dusk. Others retreat into the dens and thickets where they will rest, their breathing slow, their ears attuned to the night. The forest changes too. Crickets and frogs take up the rhythm, and the air cools just enough to carry the scent of flowers that only open after dark. You sit with the narrator at the edge of a small rise, watching the last light bleed from the sky. Somewhere below, a watcher waits in perfect stillness, unseen even now. You imagine its breath, its eyes tracking every shadow, its mind patient enough to let the world come to it. What does it mean to wait for the world to come close? Perhaps it means knowing that timing is as important as action. Perhaps it means holding your strength until the exact moment it will matter most. The watchers of the Mesozoic lived by this truth, and in doing so, they shaped the balance of their world. The stars appear, shy at first, then brighter. The night belongs to both hunter and hunted now, and the game will continue under a different set of rules. The narrator's voice softens, as though not to disturb the unseen lives moving below. Patience, he says again, is a kind of hunting, and in every age, the ones who understand this are the ones who endure. You stand to leave, but the forest does not seem empty. It feels aware, as though it will remember you as one more shadow that passed through. Somewhere in the dark, a predator shifts its weight, the leaves rustling like a quiet promise. And the watchers, still waiting, fade back into the night. What is the shape of a world you cannot see from shore? Perhaps it is a shifting mirror, always folding in on itself. Perhaps it is a blue lung, breathing in tides and exhaling storms. Or perhaps it is not a single shape at all, but 1,000 overlapping stories, each one told in the language of water. The question drifts like sunlight beneath the surface. Who roamed the oceans when the land was still ruled by dragons? He stands where the sand meets the sea, the horizon softened by the haze of a warm Mesozoic day. The air is heavy with salt and the faint, metallic scent of marine life. A wave laps against his boots and retreats, leaving tiny shells behind like commas in an unfinished sentence. The oceans, he says, were never empty between the ages of the dinosaurs. They had their own giants. You follow his gaze beyond the breakers into the deep. There, the surface hides whole civilizations, creatures as strange and vast as anything that walked on land. The reptiles of the sea were not dinosaurs, though they shared the same era. They were something else entirely. The ichthyosaurs with bodies shaped like swift torpedoes, the long-necked plesiosaurs who seemed to carry the grace of swans into an alien world, the mosasaurs immense and muscular, whose movements wrote sharp sentences in the water. The narrator tells you that the oceans of this time were warmer than today, the currents slower, the reefs sprawling across continental shelves like jeweled cities. Sunlight reached farther down, filling the shallows with colors so vivid they seemed almost too bright for the eye. Schools of fish moved in synchrony, each turn like a note in a silent symphony, and gliding between them, the great marine reptiles hunted, played, and traveled, tracing invisible highways that tied the continents together. You see one now, an ichthyosaur breaking the surface with a gentle exhale, its back catching the sun like polished stone. It slips under again, and for a moment, the only trace of it is a widening ring of ripples. They were masters of breathing between two worlds. The narrator murmurs. Air above, life below. Farther out, a plesiosaur rises, its long neck curving in an elegant S-shape. Its head turns, as if curious about you on the shore, before it slides back into the blue. Beneath the surface, it will chase fish through forests of kelp, its flippers moving in a rhythm that has no land-bound equivalent. A dance made only for water. Life in the Mesozoic oceans was not all quiet grace. Mosasaurs, the apex predators of their realm, moved with the authority of storms. Their tails could drive them forward with bursts of speed that left no time for their prey to flee. Yet even they had moments of stillness, drifting in the sunlit shallows to let smaller fish pick at their skin. Predators and scavengers, it seems, shared more than just territory. They shared the rituals of care. The narrator leads you along the shore to a tidal, its surface trembling with the breath of tiny waves. He kneels and points to a collection of shells, some spiraled, some ridged like the roof of an ancient temple. The small things, he says, were as important as the great. Ammonites, with their coiled shells, drifted through the open ocean, their tentacles tasting the currents. They were travelers and navigators, moving with the tides, feeding the great reptiles and, in turn, being fed by the plankton blooms that pulsed with the moon's pull. Standing again, you look to the horizon and imagine the sheer size of it all. On land, distance is measured by the ground beneath your feet. At sea, distance is measured by the patience of waves. The narrator explains that some marine reptiles may have traveled hundreds of miles in a single journey, chasing seasonal migrations or the warmth of changing currents. In a way, they were the ocean's own nomads, writing their lives across maps that shifted with each tide. The day leans toward evening, and the color of the water deepens into a darker, more secretive blue. The wind carries a cooler edge now, and with it comes the calls of seabirds, creatures that bridge the gap between ocean and sky. You watch them dive, striking the surface with a grace that mirrors the predators below. In the Mesozoic, the skies above the water were busy too, filled with pterosaurs that skimmed the waves or rested on rocky outcrops, their wings drying in the sun. As the light fades, the ocean begins to reveal a softer rhythm. Bioluminescent plankton drift upward, tiny lanterns igniting in the dark. You imagine the great reptiles moving through this glow, their bodies outlined in light, leaving swirling trails behind them like comets in reverse. The narrator says this was a kind of night magic, a meeting of deep time and deep water that no eye then, or now, could truly capture. You sit on the sand beside him, your ears full of the ocean's endless exhale. The land and the sea were never separate worlds, he says quietly. They traded life back and forth in a conversation that has never stopped. The great marine reptiles may be gone, but their patterns remain. The migrations of whales, the hunting style of dolphins, the shape of fish that still recall the ichthyosaur's streamlined grace. Even now, the sea holds the memory of those who once breathed in its depths. The moon rises, scattering silver across the waves. Somewhere beyond sight, a plesiosaur arches through the dark water of memory, and an ichthyosaur surfaces for a breath that will never come again in reality, but always will here. The ocean breathes, and you breathe with it, as though the two rhythms have been linked all along. What is the shape of a world you cannot see from shore? Perhaps it is a horizon that never ends, yet holds the entire history of life in its folds. Perhaps it is a breath drawn deep and slow that has been going on for hundreds of millions of years. The Mesozoic seas were not just the stage for ancient reptiles. They were the pulse of the planet, beating in time with the sun and moon. The narrator's voice is little more than the hush of waves now. When you dream tonight, he says, remember that there are worlds under every surface, past and present, still moving in their own time. And as the tide reaches your feet, you feel it, the ocean's ancient breath, still carrying the ghosts of giants. How does a future arrive? Sudden as rain, or slow as a heartbeat in an egg? The question settles like evening light on a clearing. Quiet, amber, unafraid. In this part of the Mesozoic, the world hushes not because predators pass, but because beginnings are near. The air is sweet with damp earth and crushed fern. A wind crosses the plain, careful as a hand adjusting a blanket. Somewhere, just beyond a crescent of low trees, the ground is patterned with circles and cups, a constellation at your feet. Nests, dozens, perhaps hundreds. The sky above is wide. The horizon stands back to give room. And in the middle of it all, life leans forward. He is already there, kneeling at the nearest hollow, voice low and steady, as if he has come to listen more than speak. A nest, he murmurs, brushing dust aside with 2 fingers, is a promise the earth agrees to keep. You draw closer. In the shallow bowl, a ring of eggs glows pale and stone smooth, arranged with care you can still feel. Their curved shells hold not only animals, but calendars. Heat, rest, a schedule written without numbers. Around you, the colony moves at a tempo that calms the blood. Adults step softly, long tails describing slow commas in the air. Some fetch mouthfuls of vegetation to pad and insulate. Others turn their eggs with deliberate tenderness, making certain the warmth is even, the story inside properly read by the patient clock of development. There is a rhythm to it, 1, 2, lift, settle, like a tide poised in the shallows. He gestures toward the far side of the field, where mounded nests rise like low, sun-baked loaves. Here the ground is its own hearth. The soil remembers a volcano's last whisper, he says, and releases the memory as heat. The image hangs there, Earth as a grandparent, brooding its grandchildren. In some ages and places, the land itself keeps the eggs warm. In others, bodies do, draped across the clutch like a shawl. Either way, the recipe is simple and ancient. A vessel, a steady warmth, a span of days long enough for possibility to take shape. You notice variations, different sizes of nests, different arrangements, different ways of guarding. One pair stands close, heads inclined toward one another as if sharing the same thought. Another adult rests in a ring around a clutch, forelimbs curled, chest feathers, or were they fine filaments of some other kind, spreading a little to catch the sun. We cannot know the exact colors of their care, but the posture is unmistakable. An old tenderness in a new body. He smiles, hearing your thought before you speak it. Care is older than names, he says. It simply borrows whatever hands or wings or breath the era provides. He does not list species or measurements. He lets the scene teach softly. The colony's voices rise and fall. Chirrups, low coos, a far-carrying call that wavers like heat over stone. Communication here is a woven thing. Sound, posture, distance, return. Some adults trade the watch. Some take the morning sun, while others take the afternoon shade. The arrangement feels less like rules and more like river water finding the easiest path. Overhead, a cloud pulls its shadow across the plain. For a moment the temperature dips, and bodies draw nearer to eggs. The narrator lays a palm close to one shell, not touching, only sensing. Warmth is a language the young understand before hearing, he murmurs. Inside, there is drifting, dividing, the slow music of a heart rehearsing a beat it will someday test against air. You feel suddenly reverent toward the unhatched. How they wait without knowing they wait. How they grow without ever having seen growth. On the colony's edge, a watchful adult lifts its head and freezes. Silence spreads like ink. Far away, something moves in the grass, reconsidering. The spell breaks without panic. The colony rain hails. The small sounds return. Even danger is answered with continuity, not frenzy. Here, survival is a chorus line. One voice alert, many voices steady. When the sun leans toward afternoon, the smell of warm resin and dust thickens. Wind plays a soft hand over the nests. The narrator draws a circle in the soil with a twig. An egg, he says, is a universe with one law, open from within. He speaks of shells as paradoxes, fragile enough to break at the right time, strong enough to hold back a world until it is ready. He speaks of pores like tiny windows, of exchange and breath, of the quiet trade between inside and outside. He is careful not to press too hard on the words, letting them rest where they fall. You imagine the moment, days or weeks from now, when a tap comes from within. A second, a third, A seam of light appears like a new coastline on an old map. Bits of shell flake away, a constellation unpinning itself. The first sound the newborn makes is not a cry but a crack. The first movement is a spiral. Push, rest, push, echoing the slow forces that coil galaxies and unfurl ferns. The world has reheard this moment uncountable times, and still it leans in. The colony contains many such futures. Some nests will open in close company, the air filling with soft, uncertain voices. Adults will lower heads, touch beak to beak, offer the first sweet mash of leaves or insects or something in between. Tiny feet will test the dust, leaving tracks that look like punctuation marks in a poem the wind can read. Some young will stand within the hour, all legs and wonder. Others will tuck themselves beneath a parent's shadow and sleep, practicing the art of staying. You notice how beginnings change endings. Where the colony thrives, the land alters. Plants are clipped and seeded, soil turned and enriched, predators tempted and then learned. The place grows a seam of memory. Even after the nesting season ends and the adults depart, the shape of the year remains here, like fingerprints in dried clay. Next time they will return. Next time the wind will arrive already knowing their names. Not every egg will open. The narrator acknowledges this with the softness one reserves for facts that cannot be argued with. Some shells will cool too quickly. Some floods will come too soon. Some hungry mouths will find what watchful eyes miss. Loss is the dark thread, he says, that lets the bright threads be seen. He does not linger there, but neither does he look away. The colony, too, has learned to carry both promise and cost in the same careful arms. Toward evening, a faint tremor rolls underfoot, the earth clearing its throat somewhere beyond the hills. A filament of ash drifts high and fine. You glance at the nests, at the smooth shells and the patient bodies, and you think of time as a kiln that sometimes warms, sometimes fires too hot. Yet the colony continues, adjusting, sheltering, recovering eggs with a little more plant matter, a little less. Persistence, here, is not defiance. It is choreography with the world. The light becomes honeyed and low. Shadows of long tails and arched backs stretch like sundials across the ground. The narrator invites you to sit. If you listen, he says, you can hear tomorrow practicing. You close your eyes. There is the almost silence of shells holding breath. There is the whisper of bodies rearranging, the soft combing of snouts through vegetation, the minute ticking of insects threading the air. Under it all, a pulse you cannot localize. Perhaps yours, perhaps the colony's, perhaps the planet's long inhale before night. When you open your eyes, the first stars have appeared. Cautious, early, as if peeking around a curtain. The nests look like bowls catching the last of the day. A parent stands, turns eggs with care, and settles again. A small adjustment that feels as momentous as a change of season. You realize you have been breathing slower for some time, your own inner weather moderated by the spectacle of patience. How does a future arrive? Sudden as rain? Or slow as a heartbeat in an egg? Perhaps both. A shell cracks in an instant. A life gathers itself over weeks and months. The colony is a clock with many hands, each keeping a slightly different time, all moving in the same direction. Tomorrow will lift itself on new legs. Tomorrow will blink in light it does not have words for. But tonight, the work is simple and profound. Keep the warmth, hold the promise, share the watch. The narrator rises, dusts his hands, and looks over the wide, quiet city of nests. Every age, he says, has its cradles. Then he turns and you follow, leaving the colony to its evening labor. Behind you, the ground continues to breathe in small, measured ways, and somewhere inside a shell, a question becomes a tap, becomes a seam, becomes a world. Night takes the plain in gentle steps. The crickets begin their stitched song. The first coolness touches your cheek. And in the dark, the unhatched keep time with the cosmos. Pulse for pulse, heat for heat, breath for breath. Learning, already, how to arrive. What is it like to stand inside a living clock? Not a clock made of gears or springs, but one whose hands are shadows moving across bark. one whose ticking is the slow lift of leaves toward the sun, one that measures time not in hours, but in seasons, centuries, and the silent trade between air and breath. In the Mesozoic, such clocks were everywhere, and they went by another name, forests. He waits for you at the edge of one, where the morning light meets a wall of green. The air here is thicker, softer, scented with resin and damp soil. The trunks before you rise like ancient columns, their crowns lost high above in a layered ceiling of fronds, needles, and wide, flat leaves. This, the narrator says, is where the earth's breath is made. You step inside and the light changes. It is not gone but filtered, passed through green glass until it feels gentle on the skin. The ground is uneven, braided with roots, carpeted with moss and fallen fronds. The air holds a faint shimmer, as if it has just been exhaled by the trees themselves. And in a way it has. The narrator's voice is unhurried, as if matching the pulse of the place. He tells you that the forests of the Mesozoic were unlike the ones you know. Cycads, ginkgos, conifers, and towering tree ferns were the architects here, shaping the light and feeding the air. The leaves drank in sunlight and returned it as food for themselves and oxygen for all who breathed. The trade was so constant, so steady, that most creatures never thought of it at all, only lived within its generosity. High above, a breeze moves through the canopy. It's a sound like distant rain, though the sky is clear. The leaves speak in slow syllables, their words about light, water, and patience. You realize that the forest is not silent. It only speaks at a pace slower than you are used to. If you stay long enough, you will learn its language. You walk with him deeper, past a stand of tree ferns whose fronds arch overhead like open parasols. In their shade, smaller plants thrive. Mosses, horsetails, and tender shoots that will one day stretch toward the light. This layering, he explains, is the forest's way of making more life from the same patch of ground. Sunlight is broken into portions, shared among those who can take it. In such generosity, an ecosystem builds itself. Here and there, you find signs of the giants who share the forest. A broad swath of trampled ferns marks where a sauropod has passed, its long neck grazing the high leaves. A claw-marked tree bears evidence of a predator's leap, perhaps in pursuit of smaller prey. Yet the forest absorbs these events without drama. It grows back, fills in, covers the scars with green. He stops beside a fallen trunk, its surface soft with age and life. Tiny ferns have rooted in its cracks. Mushrooms lift pale caps from its side. Even in falling, he says, the tree feeds the forest. It is not an ending so much as a change in address. The nutrients once held in would now offered to soil, insects, and plants. You think of it as a library returning its books to be read again in new forms. The air here is cooler, wetter. Somewhere nearby, water moves, a small stream threading its way between roots. Its surface reflects patches of sky, turning with every ripple. Along its banks, cycads stand like sentinels, their armored trunks guarding cones the size of melons. The cones will open when ready, releasing seeds into the understory's patient care. The narrator kneels by the stream and cups his hands in the water. The forest doesn't end at the ground, he says. Its roots are part of the sky's work. The water carries dissolved minerals, feeding the trees, which in turn feed the air. Every sip you take is part of that loop, a cycle so constant that it has no beginning or end. As the day leans toward afternoon, shafts of sunlight angle through the canopy. They illuminate drifting motes, pollen, spores, tiny insects, all moving in slow currents. Some of these specks will become new plants. Some will feed small mouths. The forest, you see, is not only a clock but a kitchen, a nursery, and a cathedral all at once. Its architecture is alive, and every leaf and branch is part of a vast conversation. You pause beside a ginkgo tree, its fan-shaped leaves trembling slightly. This tree's ancestors have stood for hundreds of millions of years, weathering extinctions and climates both warmer and colder than today. To touch its bark is to touch persistence itself. You wonder if it remembers the weight of different skies, the scent of different rains. Far above, A pterosaur glides between openings in the canopy, its shadow slipping over you like a brushstroke. It is passing through, but for a moment it belongs to the forest. Many do. Insects, amphibians, reptiles, early mammals. Each finds a place here, whether in the soil, the branches, or the air between. The forest holds them all in a kind of loose embrace. Evening approaches and the light shifts again, now golden, now leaning toward shadow. The forest's tempo changes subtly. Leaves close or tilt. Flowers fold themselves. Some creatures begin their foraging. Others find a place to rest. The narrator's voice is softer now, as though not to disturb the transition. This is the forest's other breath, he says. The one it takes at night. You realize that the living clock has more than two hands. It has countless ones, each keeping its own time. Some tick with the seasons, some with the tides, some with the turn from day to night. All of them together keep the world's balance. You stop at a small clearing where the trees open to the first stars. The forest breathes around you. It sounds a mix of settling leaves, distant calls, and the faint rush of wind high in the canopy. Somewhere, sap moves within trunks. Somewhere, a seed splits, and a root begins its first slow journey downward. What is it like to stand inside a living clock? Perhaps it is to stand within a story so large that you forget you are in it, until you hear the ticking. Perhaps it is to feel the minutes as the tilt of a leaf, the shift of a shadow, the cool of evening air against your skin. In the Mesozoic, the forests kept such time without pause, turning sunlight into breath, turning breath into life. The narrator lingers beside you as the last light fades. The clocks will keep, he says. Long after one age ends and another begins, they will keep. You think of the ginkgo's leaves, the fern's spiral, the slow fall of cones. They are still here even now in your own time, keeping part of the same count. Night draws the forest into itself. Above, the canopy becomes a silhouette against the sky's deeper blue. You breathe in, and the air is cool, green, and old. Somewhere, the living clock ticks on, unseen but unbroken, marking another chapter in the Earth's long, patient breath. What does it mean for water to carry memory? Not just the memory of a recent rain, but the deep memory of mountains worn away, of valleys carved and refilled, of lives that came to drink and left their shadows in the current. Rivers are not merely paths for water. They are the Earth's long sentences, written without hurry. In the Mesozoic, they told stories to every creature that touched their banks. He is there when you arrive, standing knee-deep in a gentle bend of the river, trousers rolled, hands cupped to let the water pass through. The sound is low and constant, a voice that has been speaking for millions of years without losing its calm. Every drop, he says, has been somewhere else before, and it will be somewhere else again. You step to the bank, where the ground is dark and rich from countless floods. The air is damp, cool in the shade of nearby trees. Insects trace lazy loops above the surface, and every so often, a ripple hints at a fish rising. This is no roaring torrent, no dramatic cascade. It is a patient river, the kind that moves with such steadiness that you almost forget it is moving at all. The narrator leads you along the shore. His voice matches the river's pace, words drifting as smoothly as leaves in the current. He tells you that the rivers of the Mesozoic were lifelines for the land. They braided through plains and forests, feeding wetlands where amphibians lurked and ferns grew tall. They cut canyons over centuries, then filled them with silt and seeds. They changed course slowly, but they always moved forward. The creatures knew them well. Herds of plant-eating dinosaurs would descend the banks at dawn, their feet pressing temporary wells into the mud. Long-necked sauropods stood half-submerged, drinking for minutes at a time, eyes half-closed in the coolness. Smaller animals scurried between the reeds, taking water quickly before darting back into the safety of cover. Even predators came here, not always to hunt, but to drink, sharing the edge in a temporary truce as necessary as breathing. Sometimes the river told its story through what it carried. Driftwood from faraway forests, shells from distant shores, stones worn round by journeys longer than any living creature could make. Other times, it spoke through absence. Dry banks where water had pulled away, leaving behind cracked clay etched with the tracks of those who had come too late. The narrator stops where the water widens into a shallow pool. Sunlight strikes the surface, revealing fish that shimmer like molten metal. A river, he says, is a meeting place. It holds the mountain in one hand and the ocean in the other. You watch the fish move against the current, muscles working in small, efficient bursts. They know the river's moods: the sudden rise after rain, the slow retreat in dry spells. Farther downstream, the banks open into a broad floodplain. Here, the river overflows in certain seasons, depositing layers of fertile soil that feed entire ecosystems. Cycads and conifers crowd the higher ground, their roots gripping tight against the pull of water. Ferns and horsetails fill the wetter pockets, their stems trembling in the breeze. Insects hum in the air, and dragonflies, some with wingspans wider than your hand, drift lazily above the shallows. You kneel to touch the water. It is warmer than you expect, having traveled long under the sun before reaching this place. The narrator tells you it is older than the trees that shade it now. He speaks of water molecules as wanderers, crossing from ocean to cloud to rain to river to sea again, over and over, never losing themselves but never staying the same. The river, he says, is the visible part of a much longer journey. In the heat of midday, the world around the river slows. Animals rest in the shade. Even the insects seem to hang in the air. The only movement is the water, sliding around rocks and roots with the ease of something that has been practicing for eons. You realize there is no straight line here, only curves, only the softness that can wear away stone. He points to a stretch where the bank has collapsed, exposing layers of earth like pages in a book. Some layers are dark and fine, others pale and sandy. Within them are tiny fossils, bits of shells, imprints of leaves, the delicate outlines of creatures long vanished. The river has kept these pages safe, only to reveal them in its own time. As afternoon lengthens, you follow the narrator upstream. The sound changes, quicker, more urgent where the water narrows. Here, fallen logs span the current, their surfaces slick with moss. Small eddies swirl in the gaps between stones, each one holding its own miniature world. Tadpoles flick through the shadows. Water striders skate in improbable straight lines, their movements so light they leave no mark at all. The narrator pauses at a bend where the current slows again, forming a mirror of sky and branch. A river, he says, is also a listener. It catches the rain's fall, the snows melt, the whisper of tributaries joining in. It remembers these voices and carries them forward, mixing them into something new. You think of it as a long song with verses added by every place it passes. Evening comes gradually, the light softening until the river looks like a path of liquid bronze. The banks are alive again, animals emerging for a final drink before night. The air cools, and mist begins to rise from the surface, curling like the breath of some great sleeping creature. The narrator's voice is quiet now, almost blending with the sound of the water. When you leave, he says, the river will still be telling its story. It never stops. What does it mean for water to carry memory? Perhaps it means that nothing is ever truly gone, only transformed, passed forward, reshaped by time and distance. The rivers of the Mesozoic carried mountains into oceans, carried the shadows of dinosaurs into the sea, carried the scent of forests far beyond their roots. And even now, in your own time, some of those same molecules may rest in the glass you drink from, the rain on your window, the tear at the corner of your eye. The narrator steps from the water, leaving small prints that the river will soon erase. The current goes on, unconcerned, holding past and present in the same steady hands. You stand and watch it disappear around the bend, knowing that it will carry its memories far beyond your sight. Night deepens. The river's surface darkens to a ribbon of shifting stars. Frogs call from the reeds. Somewhere upstream, a fish jumps, the splash loud in the stillness. You breathe in the cool, damp air, and for a moment you feel as though you, too, are part of the current, moving, remembering, becoming. And the river flows on, telling its endless story, one bend at a time. What is the oldest conversation you can still hear? It is not carved in stone or painted on a wall. It does not live in a book or in the bones of a museum. It is carried in the air itself, invisible, weightless, and ancient. The wind has been speaking since before there were ears to listen, and in the Mesozoic, it spoke to every leaf, every wing, every scaled crest that lifted toward the sky. He meets you on a rise where the land rolls gently toward the horizon, a place where the view is so wide it feels like standing at the edge of a breath. The air moves here without obstruction, carrying scents from forests, rivers, and the far-off sea. If you close your eyes, he says, you can hear where the wind has been. You do. And it's true, there are layers to it. A cool thread from shaded valleys, warm currents from sunlit plains, a faint saltiness from distant waves. The wind is a messenger, weaving together landscapes that never touch. In the Mesozoic, it carried more than sense, carried survival. The narrator explains, in a voice as unhurried as the air around you, that for the great reptiles, the wind was both guide and warning. Pterosaurs read its currents like an open map, launching into invisible roads that could take them across oceans. Predators tested it for the scent of prey hidden far beyond sight. Herds lifted their heads when it shifted, catching the smell of rain or the trace of something that did not belong. You picture a long-necked sauropod pausing mid-browse, nostrils flaring at a warm gust from the south. Somewhere beyond that horizon, a wildfire might be turning forest to ash, and the scent arrives here hours before the danger. You picture a small, feathered predator tilting its head, the breeze bringing the faint musk of nesting colonies. The wind told these things without urgency, as if simply offering a choice. Go toward or go away. Moving along the ridge, you feel the wind change. Here it runs faster, shaped by the land's contour, funneled between rocky outcrops. The narrator points to a cluster of cycads below. Their fronds shiver, scattering pollen into the air. The wind is also a planter, he says. In this age before flowering plants became dominant, much of the world's greenery relied on wind to spread its future. Pollen drifting unseen until it found a home. Forests grew on the back of this slow generosity. You pass into a grove where the air is almost still. The change is immediate. The world feels closer. Sound travels differently. The narrator pauses here. Windless places, he says, are the commas in the earth's sentences. They make you notice what came before and what will come after. You think of creatures who preferred such calm. Small insects, delicate flyers whose lives depended on avoiding the pull and scatter of a breeze. Even in an age of giants, there were pockets where the air chose to rest. As you leave the grove, the land drops toward an open plain. The wind greets you again, warmer now, full of the scent of sunlit grass and the distant, metallic tang of rain. You see movement far off, a group of horned dinosaurs shifting in the shimmering heat. Their crests rise and fall like living sails, catching the wind in ways that may have carried sound, or perhaps even scent, to others of their kind. The narrator wonders aloud if the wind helped them speak to one another, low calls riding farther than they could otherwise carry. Midday passes in warmth and motion. You watch a pterosaur circle above, hardly moving its wings, carried entirely by the invisible hand of an updraft. Tilts one way, then the other, as if testing the edges of a current. The wind, the narrator says, is a shape that cannot be seen but can be ridden. He explains that skill in flight was less about strength and more about reading those shapes, knowing when to trust them and when to leave them behind. Farther along, the ridge narrows, and the wind gathers strength. You lean into it, feeling its cool push against your chest. There's a wildness here, a reminder that the wind can be more than a gentle messenger. In the Mesozoic, storms would sweep across entire continents, the wind pulling at trees until they bent, driving waves against ancient shores. Those moments were not gentle, but they were part of the same language, an exclamation in an otherwise measured conversation. By late afternoon, the air begins to cool. Shadows stretch across the plain, and the wind shifts again, this time carrying the smell of damp earth. Somewhere far away, rain has begun to fall, and the wind brings the news long before a single drop arrives. Herds on the horizon turn slowly toward the scent. Overhead, Clouds build in layered grays, their edges catching gold from the sinking sun. The narrator stops and turns to face into the breeze. The wind remembers, he says. It remembers the dust of volcanoes, the pollen of ancient forests, the breath of creatures long gone. You are breathing some of that now. You let the thought settle in you, the idea that the air itself is a kind of fossil, one that never stopped moving. Evening deepens, and the wind softens again, as if tired from its day's work. The land falls quiet except for the low rustle of leaves. Somewhere in the darkening sky, the last pterosaur of the day glides homeward, letting the final thermals carry it toward a roost. What is the oldest conversation you can still hear? Perhaps it is the one that never stopped, that spoke to the first fern and the last giant, that moves now across your own skin without asking permission. The winds of the Mesozoic shaped migrations, pollinated forests, spread the news of storms and fire, carried voices farther than they could travel alone. And they are still speaking, in the rustle of modern leaves, in the salt taste of a sea breeze, in the way a storm announces itself long before the clouds arrive. The narrator turns toward the path down the ridge. The air will carry your scent too, he says. For a little while, you realize that you too will be part of the wind's story, however briefly. As night takes the land, the wind shifts one last time, cool and clean, carrying with it the faintest scent of rain and the whisper of leaves. It moves on, unhurried, to places you will never see. Still speaking, still remembering, still connecting the world with every breath. What is the sound of an age ending? It is not always a roar. Sometimes it is a slow dimming, like a lamp burning lower each evening until one night it does not return. Sometimes it is the quiet rearranging of the world's furniture. Rivers changing course, forests thinning, skies wearing a different shade. And sometimes, the end comes with a suddenness so large it feels like silence, because there is no one left to hear the first moment of it. He meets you on a high ridge, one that overlooks a wide, open plain. The sun is low, copper and soft, casting the land in long strokes of shadow. You have been here before, in different lights, in different seasons, watching herds move and wings tilt over the horizon. But this time the air feels unsettled. The light is beautiful, yet there is something in it that makes you look twice. An ending, the narrator says gently, is not a single event. It is a braid. He speaks of changes already underway long before the final page. Climates shifting, seas withdrawing, volcanic breath clouding the skies. For the dragons of the Mesozoic, the great reptiles of land, sea, and air, these changes came first as whispers, small adjustments in migration, in diet, in the places they chose to rest. Below, the plain is still busy. A group of horned dinosaurs graze in the low grass. In the distance, long-necked silhouettes bend and straighten among the trees. A pterosaur rides the last thermals of the day, its shadow skimming the golden light. Nothing here seems afraid. Life does not know it is on the verge of history. It only knows the moment it inhabits. The narrator leads you down from the ridge toward a shallow lake, where the air is heavy with the smell of water and plants. The earth, he says, has turned many pages. This is simply one of them. He kneels and scoops a handful of mud, letting it run between his fingers. Somewhere in this mud are the seeds of what will come after, the plants that will survive, the small creatures that will inherit a quieter, stranger world. He speaks of the sky darkening, not for an afternoon, but for months. Of sunlight filtered through ash until the warmth could not reach the ground. Of plants slowing their growth, and the herbivores that relied on them finding less each week. Of predators, once rulers of their ranges, wandering farther for smaller meals. And yet, for a time, life went on because life almost always tries. You walk together along the lake's edge. The surface reflects the colors of evening, gold sliding into rose, rose deepening into purple. Insects still hum above the water. A pair of small, feathered dinosaurs dart among the reeds, their calls quick and bright. There were survivors. The narrator reminds you. Some lines end, others bend. The thought is both comforting and bittersweet. As night comes, you picture the great reptiles resting. Sauropods folded in the safety of a grove, predators lying low in the cool grass, wings tucked along a cliffside. They sleep without knowing they are the last of their kind. The stars above them are the same ones you see now, though in a slightly different arrangement, as if the sky has also been slowly moving to a new position. The narrator's voice softens. The end of the dragons was not the end of wonder. He tells you of how birds rose from the lineage of small, feathered hunters, carrying pieces of the ancient sky into every morning that followed. Of how mammals, once quiet and hidden, began to fill the spaces left behind. Of how forests reshaped themselves, and rivers traced new paths, and the air filled again with different songs. He does not speak of tragedy in a loud voice. He lets it be what it is, part of the great cycling of life, loss and renewal woven together. Every ending, he says, is a seed in disguise. You find a place to sit and watch the stars multiply overhead. The night is deep now, the land still except for the soft movements of creatures settling. Somewhere far away, a low rumble rolls through the earth, volcanic or perhaps the final echo of some vast collision. The narrator does not turn toward it. The earth, he says, will keep breathing. You think of all the ages layered beneath your feet. Oceans turned to stone, forests pressed into coal, footprints of creatures who never saw the ones who came after. You think of the dragons not as vanished curiosities, but as chapters in the same book you are still reading. Their breath is gone, but their story is in the air, in the rocks, in the very shape of the continents. The moon rises, bright enough to silver the lake and cast faint shadows. You feel the quiet settle in your bones. Not the quiet of absence, but of continuation. The narrator looks out across the dark water. One day, he says, your own age will rest, and something new will stand where you stand. The question is not how to prevent the page from turning, but how to write your chapter so it is worth remembering. The thought lingers as the wind shifts, cool against your face. You imagine the great reptiles dreaming in their last nights. Not of extinction, but of rivers they have crossed, skies they have ridden, forests they have walked. Their memories are not endings. They are landscapes. What is the sound of an age ending? Perhaps it is the same as the sound of one beginning. The breath of the world, steady and patient, moving through whatever shapes life chooses to take. In the Mesozoic, the dragons were that shape. In the ages that followed, others would rise. And now, here you are, breathing the same air that once filled their vast lungs. The narrator stands, and you rise with him. Together you walk back toward the ridge. Behind you, the lake holds the stars in its surface. Ahead, the path leads into darkness and the promise of another dawn. And in that quiet, you understand. The dragons are not gone. They are sleeping in the bones of mountains, in the memory of rivers, in the flight of every bird and the shadow of every lizard basking in the sun. They are in the wind that brushes your face and in the warmth that comes with morning. The age has turned, but the story remains. Endless, breathing, waiting for the next reader to lean in.